Oh boy. Alright. Well, I just played a rather truncated game of No Peace Without Spain. And right off the bat, I'm going to tell you, personally, I'm very disappointed with what I have here. But that doesn't mean it's a bad game. In fact, my expectations were probably somewhat foolish in the sense that when I first looked at this online, it was really just a, ooh, maybe, but that really looks light. And somehow I got my hopes up a little too high on it. Saw a somewhat cheaper version. I probably saved about $10 off the pre-order or whatever, and picked it up. And I would have pre-ordered anyway, and it's just it reminds me of the bad old days of the S&T and Wargamer magazines, when they would touch on subjects that were really, really exciting to me that nobody had done enough on, and then just do this incredibly light treatment on. Is this an incredibly light treatment? Yes. Is it as bad as those were? I don't think so. It doesn't feel quite as unpleasant as they did. This may be components more than anything else. You've got this pretty map. The rules aren't perfect, but they're certainly went through some attempt to keep them from being a mess. A lot of those Wargamer and 90s S&Ts had real problems. I come up with these nice player aid cards. The counters, I think, are very, very pretty for what they are. Smooth little functional things. Maybe it's just that I like these purple French, and I like the thinness of the counters. They remind me of the Zero-ish ones that way. The cards, there aren't a lot of them, and the operations cards, oh, they're so pretty though. They have these pieces of artwork on them that make them very pleasant. There's a lot of things to make me think that I'll break this out and play it again. Whereas some of those others, like 30 Years War, I'm never gonna look at again, except at least not with any longing or pleasure. So this kind of reminds me of something like Age of Napoleon in terms of what level of play it is. Now, that for me, there's certainly a, but damn it, why can't they do a real one? Okay, it's a small market share. There's no question. There aren't a lot of people who are interested in the War of Spanish Succession. However, my take on it is the people who are interested in the lighter games probably are more interested in the big historical periods. They're less interested in the history, but more interested in this, panoramic view of something that is familiar to them, like Napoleon or World War II. That's why games like Axis and Allies and Age of Napoleon have their slots. What I've never understood was who is the intended market for this. I think the people voting for, when there's polls done, are the people who are saying, "Oh man, that's what we need. We don't cover that." It shouldn't feel very much the same as a Napoleonic game or as a World War II game. This has its differentiator. Certainly, its use of the opposite event cards is interesting, but that could have been at any period. It doesn't matter what you're doing there. The events and the history contained in them is not at the level that you'd normally see in a CDG. So, unlike, Here I Stand, you don't have really a lot of richness in terms of the historical little quirks and things that can happen in the game. Instead, what you've got is what comes down to a very abstracted strategic military exploration at a really light level. These ops cards, definitely the points, it's definitely a neat little concept branching away from the regular ops events. The events, though, aren't deep enough and aren't rich enough to the game to give it a lot of flavor. A little better than rolling on a chart, but not terribly much, just in terms of ease and enjoyment. The actual play of the game, I think, is an interesting game to play. As a game, I think that this one would be of more interest than as a topical simulation of any sense. As a two-player competitive game with a lot of luck in it. Realize that there is a lot of luck. First of all, you've got those handfuls of dice. Now, luck can be mitigated with lots and lots of dice. There's no question there. But in this, I felt that the importance of winning a battle is so high, and the ease of doing so, there's a lot of luck involved in who will win a close battle. Of course, there's a lot of luck in your combat results table with that too. If you see, the attacker eliminated in the 1 space, it's kind of scary, and maybe an exchange or a defender eliminated in the 6 space. You're rolling on a lucky table. This is similar. If you don't have overwhelming odds, when you roll on the table, you may or may not win the battle, and some of the battles could be really, really key. In fact, right at the beginning, we saw a really key battle go over in my game, which determined the flavor and probably the shortness of the game. The map, very sparse, especially outside of the main corridor of where the action was. It's attractive to me. I like something, I don't know. I can't really object to the map. I think it's functional. The little army spaces, I think would be kind of useful given the kind of weird situation with disorganized forces. The fact that it's actually, it's not a force that's disorganized, but portions of the force that are, and that you have to keep track of that all. I think those are a helpful thing. There's a lot of play aids and little helpful reminders on the board and this, that, and the other. They really went out of their way to make this an easier game to play, and for that I thank them. I mean, that's something that's great. That's something that I think the hobby overall has progressed a lot in, and this is very much aiming towards that. But getting back to who is this targeted at? It's certainly not targeted at me. I'm looking for this topic with maybe, an Empires at Arms treatment where, it's going to take months and you can really explore the diplomatic aspects of it. Certainly, that wasn't what I thought I might get here. There were a couple of minuses to the purchase decision. One was two-player. Two-player CDGs don't excite me as much, especially if they look like they might be light. I'd prefer a light game to be multiplayer usually. I guess. I don't know. There's certainly some light games that I like otherwise. But you do get to make some very interesting calls in this that remind me, and what might actually make me like this game once I get over my disappointment at it not being one of the things I hoped for. One, some were things that I knew it couldn't be, but I also hoped that it would have a lot more flavor than it does. But one of the things is this almost awful green things from outer space-ish feel, which that's a game with a lot of luck in it. But there's a lot of strategy in it too. And in this, there's a lot of strategy involved in making your decisions on how to react to and deal with and mitigate the bad effects of that lock, while taking advantage of any possible good effects. I find that kind of intriguing, and I think that this is something that will come out a couple of times between the pretty components and that kind of feel in a two-player game. I'm not totally disappointed with the chance of this ever making it, especially in an opposed play situation. But, again, I think the people who are interested in the War of Spanish Succession want something fairly detailed. My guess is they don't want something that could have been a Napoleonic War game, or that could have been World War II. This just does not contain enough to make itself so clearly that era. The only thing it shows that I think kind of is neat is the fortified lines idea, because this was definitely a war where you had a serious entrenchment, strong points intersecting and connecting and working together in a way that you don't see in some of the later wars. You see it a little bit in Seven Year War, but you don't see it once you get to the Napoleonic Wars, where that kind of defenses would just be too expensive to do anything to slow down a Napoleonic army. And you don't see it again really until, I think, the ACW. Any time before that, you see maybe some fortifications, etc., but nothing that dramatic in terms of a line. And actually, even in the American Civil War, you don't see where a big swath of the continent is fortified. For that, you got to really wait until World War I. So that's kind of interesting, but the fact of the matter is it's not a solid entrenchment. You can bypass it, and that was regularly done. And I like that factor in this. That's maybe the one thing in this game that gives it its flavor, in my view. Along with things like the Spanish table and trying to keep Spanish morale up by maintaining ownership of it. Little things like that, the actual map itself, the choice of countries and where they are. All these things kind of do, but the combat system is very, very colorless. It's just rolling dice for each unit. That could be in any era. The ops cards, other than their very pretty paintings, there's nothing to them. They're just a number. The events, some of them are clearly somewhat tied. Some of them, like bad weather, could be any era. But even the tied one, even the ones that are tied to the game fairly well, just don't feel, it doesn't feel like there's enough going on to really link it to this era as well, anywhere near where I'd like it. And I just don't think that that's, if you're going to come up with something that anyone would find interest in, why aim for a period that hasn't been adequately covered? Because here's what happened in the 90s. Companies came out with games about eras that nobody had covered sufficiently. And they did them really light. And you know what? The people who were interested in the era didn't like them, and the people who were interested in the light games weren't interested enough in the era to give them a good rating or to purchase enough issues or whatever. And it left, the hobby again saying, Spanish succession wars aren't going to work. Nobody's interested in that. It's not true. There are enough people to cause these things to get pre-orders and to get people interested in buying them. But the people who want them, I think, can't speak for everyone, but my feeling is one of those people who really wants things like this, the people who want them, they want more than a repackaged game that could have been in any era. I'm not saying this isn't innovative. It definitely has some aspects that are interesting, it has some decisions in it that I haven't seen in other games. They're just not terribly tied to the War of Spanish Succession. Alright.